All right, guys. Thanks for your patience tonight. Having a lot of trouble with YouTube, per usual. OBS seems to fight with YouTube, and YouTube signs me out. So I've just signed in directly via the YouTube app, and I think I can be seen now. Let me know if you can see me or hear me. Welcome to Monday night, a little bit late, Neurofeedback and Chill live stream. Tonight we're going to talk about something that sounds like it should be in a Hallmark card. Where's love? In this case, where's love in the brain? So I'll just wait to make sure that I'm actually speaking to people tonight. I see Woodsia has asked a question. I'll answer that in case you can hear me, and then I'll go back to the topic. Woods is asking, I always enjoy your broadcast. I was wondering whether there are any EEG biomarkers of the attachment styles noted by Mary Ainsworth in the strange situation. Great question. EEG with regards to attachment is a little complicated because most of the things I would consider phenotypes or patterns in the EEG, we end up looking at the population level. And so one, it's a little hard to tell what's atypical and what's a normal variant, what's regulatory and what's a quirk. And secondly, a lot of the things in attachment we would consider, I think, subcortical. So you end up with amygdala and deeper tissues that are not necessarily EEG generating tissues. I also think that difficulties in attachment may come in early life and learning, such that we don't necessarily have as much of a brain cramping up against adverse experience or different experience. We have a brain developing alongside it. So I don't think we see the same cortical signatures the same way, let's say in complex PTSD or developmental trauma, as we might see in regular quote unquote trauma or PTSD. So I think that's the high level. But that being said, there is research showing changes in connectivity throughout the brain and deeper stuff. And my hunch is, as we break down some of the topic tonight on where is love in the brain, this idea that you have to sort of think of the systems involved and how they might co-regulate or interregulate as part of the phenomena. That might help unpack your question too a little more. So let me know at the end if that helps at all, hopefully. Hey, Radar Ashwood, thanks for confirming you can see and hear me. Hey, Guy Soleil, nice to see you. Sorry, I was running a little late tonight. The YouTube gods were not smiling upon me very kindly. So sacrifice 5 seconds of attention, like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Maybe hit that bell notification so when I do go live, you know when it's happening. Because tonight, apparently, it was a bit late. So anyways, tonight we're going to talk about where's love in the brain. It's at least going live the first week of February. So if you're watching this, happy Monday evening or later on this week, perhaps, or some other time. We're coming up on Valentine's Day, so thought it was a good time to talk about love. So where is love in the brain? Not the Hallmark version, but what circuits, what tissues, what networks, what is activating when we're feeling love? And what do we mean in that context? Physiologically, neurologically, what do we mean when we say love? We kind of feel that. We know what it feels like, kind of, right? But it might be complicated, right? That's not a surprise. So I want to walk through some of the physiology, some of the ways we think about how love manifests in the brain. Also, I want to talk about some of the aspects of how that feeds back into pain. And for folks that have, special difficulty here, some folks that might be neurodivergent, you can talk about how some of that feeds off into rejection sensitivity and aspects of relational pain, relational OCD and things. So this is all complicated stuff, the idea that we have some heady perspective on where love is, but there may be some real neuroscience here. So bear with me, and I promise I'll walk through a bunch of things, including several tissues in the brain and also several different ways we seem to love and how the ways we love and what we love interact to create different flavors and stacks of love, if you will. So first thing, if you're looking for a love center, quote unquote, in the brain, you won't find one. There's no specific tissue. The brain will kind of troll you in that way often if you're looking for individual tissues and resources. So love is not really a specific module. It's not sitting in one spot waiting to be activated. You can't throw a lever and be in love or love more. But what love is a coordinated motivational state. Coordinated motivational state. That's the technical term. What that means in English is love is a strategy your brain runs. It assigns extreme value to a target, to a person, a child, a pet, an idea, and then it recruits appropriate behavior. Caregiving, protection, safety, it weaves that target and that behavior into your sense of self. And then it generates a strong enough activation signal, strong enough body signal that you do something about it. So think about that. The warmth in your chest, the ache in your stomach when someone you love is hurting. That's not decoration. That's signal. That's signal strength. Your brain's making the message loud enough against the background that you move, that you act. So you can think about this in network terms, networks of love or aspects that feed into the network that creates love might be a mix of reward circuits saying this matters, here's what matters. Social cognition circuits saying who are you, especially who are you with regards to me. And body sensing circuits that will say I feel like this when things combine. So when all three of those systems, the reward circuits, the social circuits, and the body sensing circuits are combined, that is love when they're coupled, when they're co-activated. But let's back up for a second and think about this, instead of the physiology, before we dig into the physiology again, let me give you a framework. I think of this as 4 layers that build up a love stack, if you will. Layer 1 is valuation. What's important? This is precious. That's your ventromedial prefrontal cortex and orbitofrontal cortices. These are your brain's value computers. This is the same system that evaluates whether a meal is worth eating. It decides if someone's worth protecting or worth investing in. And you can look at the fMRI literature on this. A meta-analysis of over 200 studies showed that these areas are core positive value hub. When you hold the positive regard, you end up with this frontal activation. These areas show up in romantic love, parental love, friendship love, even compassionate love for strangers. I just realized I should probably do a Buddhist version of this and go over different levels of metta and loving kindness and how that changes the brain, because that would be a good kind of a love meditation one would be a good one. But we're just getting into now some of the background topics here. We got some comments already coming in. Stephanie's saying love isn't real. That's right. Guy Soleil is saying I know love but can't explain it. Okay. Stephanie's saying it's an illusion. I mean, it is an illusion, but isn't everything we experience created for us in an illusory way? We're not really all that faithful transducers of reality. Most of what's happening is happening in our head. So how is that experience any less real than anything else? Ilya, hey Ilya, how's it doing tonight? Would the orbital frontal cortex also then be associated with the anterior cingulate? Yeah. So you have the orbital frontals. You've also got the ventromedial prefrontal. So not as dorsal, but ventral underside. So yes, but you also have some anterior cingulate, ACC, as well, as we'll talk about. There's different flavors, different types of attachment with love, and you'll see some of that as we dig into other types and other ways of the brain showing love. So before we dig into that, there's also laterality, left versus right. If you think about Richie Davidson's work on frontal asymmetry, you can show that approach motivation, interest, motivation in general, positivity bias, is a left dominant activation, and greater relative left over right produces that approach behavior. Greater right activation, prefrontal, tracks with withdrawal and avoidance and even anger. So when you're feeling drawn towards someone, leaning in, wanting to connect, that's left frontal areas leading. When you're pulling back, withdrawing, guarding, bracing, reacting with negativity or a bias in that direction, that's the right front. And so to some extent, this approach versus avoid has to be balanced, and love as a systemic activation will have a bit of a left hemisphere dominant kind of feature. So that was layer one of the 4 layers that create love. The first one is valuation, those frontal tissues. Second is layer 2. This is the priority. And this is where the anterior cingulate gets more involved, Elia. The front midline, your CEO, your project manager will select from competing things that you're trying to find important, or thoughts you're trying to have, or what's in your head at that moment. As you move generally toward the front of the brain, I teach everyone that the very front of the brain is high-level cognitive thought, high-level self. As you move to the back of the brain, it becomes the outside world. And so this is really what we're talking about with regards to the front versus back axis. And very, very far forward, we have valuation. As you move to the midline, you have priority. And the cingulate doesn't just feel love, it prioritizes the beloved. Caregiving, approach, protection. Love is not passive here. Love is action ready. It is holding the moment of priority. And it's no coincidence that the anterior cingulate's also involved in things like romantic obsession and even rejection dysphoria. That same prioritization circuit can get stuck in a loop, which is why love sickness can look and feel a lot like OCD. The cingulate can be driving, I must act on this, whether the signal is love or loss. So the same behavioral experience can be activated. So valuation, priority. Third level, the felt state. I feel it in my body. Your heart aches, your gut aches, you feel longing. Anterior insula. So the insula, deeper tissues here, the anterior part. This is your brain's map of the internal body state. This controls things like feeding and feeling hunger. It's also involved with smoking, cigarettes and things. If you do TMS or TDCS on the cingulate, there's some evidence you can abolish smoking behavior, for instance. If you do neurofeedback on the anterior insula through the frontal lobe, FP1 to M2 theoretically gets after some of the insular tissue. You create a really significant squashing of snacking. The urge to snack really goes away when you bring up low power beta across that axis. And the theory is that it's an insular activation. You're getting more control over the insula, therefore you're able to not let it run wild. And that creates a change in feeding or desire for food. But the felt state is bigger than that. It's not just the craving aspect. It's the entirety of interoception, or feeling the body. The warmth, the ache, the flutter, that's all of it. That's the insula. So it translates those internal signals into a conscious experience. So you're having that body sensation, and it has context. This is why love feels like a bodily state, not like a thought. So we have 3 layers so far. We've got valuation, then priority, then felt state, and the fourth, the last, is meaning. So who are you to me? This is the posterior temporal cortices, the temporoparietal junctions, the precuneus, which for those of you who don't know, we don't often train the precuneus in neurofeedback. So if you're one of my neurofeedback clients or people I mentor, the precuneus we often don't talk about. That's sort of the CP line. Central, you have the precentral and central, which is the C strip. You have the P strip, parietal. Between them would be the precuneus, in the middle at least, in the central areas. And these areas are involved with theory of mind. This is the association, putting things together, understanding what's happening in the environment around you. This helps with tracking emotions, predicting thoughts, weaving people that you love, weaving what you're focusing on into your own story. A lot of the cramping up or difficulty we get in the right temporoparietal junction, especially social anxiety, social cueing difficulty, that area may be involved in rejection sensitivity as well. That's also involved with things like understanding tone of voice and eye contact and recognizing faces. But not just doing those things in a processing way. It's also involved very, very much with understanding where the line is, the boundary is between you and the outside world. This is why you can get sensory integration issues, or find people's rejection really intense if you're really raw socially. It's because that area can't really determine the boundary, the line between you and the outside world, and you get all the feels because of it. You feel everything really deeply. The empathy is set up because you're feeling the world's feelings at that stage. And by the same token, love allows you to sort of take that person into your experience. And you're now kind of running a mini version of them inside of your mind, where you're projecting their thoughts, their goals, how they might feel about something. Your relationship to them, talking to them, is now something that echoes inside of your posterior areas of your mind. It's sort of a representation of them. So value, priority, feeling, and meaning. Different types of love, which we'll get to next, recruit these 4 layers in different amounts. The stack gets sort of created differently based on how you love, what you pointed at. So before we get there, I'll answer some questions, but drop into the chat. What kind of love feels the most intense to you? Romantic love, love for your pet, your kid, an idea. What feels the most pure, the most intense, the most strong to you? I'm curious. Let me answer some questions while you're answering mine. Stephanie's saying, when I had a brain injury, I was not able to feel love anymore and many other emotions. Interesting. It's very clear to me that love is just a tool for the brain that can be turned off like a light switch. A lot of what we understand about the brain from an early level is based on brain injuries. We knock out different areas and we get different experiences. We are discovering that people are variable, and also that individual injuries can create network changes. So, I'm guessing your experience, Stephanie, is because you change relationships between regions more than there being a particular region involved. I think what I'll talk about tonight might underscore the idea that it's many, many regions involved, and the coordination is what is maybe involved. There's some research suggesting that we really might be able to experience up to 6 different types of love, if you will. This gets a bit beyond the old Greek eros, agape, and philia, romantic, cognitive, and platonic, essentially, or maybe I'm conflating them. Ilya is chiming in here, so it kind of substantiates the 6 Greek loves. Are there 6? I don't know my Greek mythology that well, Ilya. Are there 6? There's eros, which is sexual love. There's agape, which is romantic love. And there's philia, which is brotherly or cognitive love. Are there 3 more? Because that'd be kind of cool if they mapped reasonably well in the studies. You can be my research assistant here, Ilya, and look it up for me and come on back. So anyways, in a study last year, or 2024 rather, Rinne and associates at Aalto University in Finland published what I think is the best love story, the best love neuroimaging study that we have. Ilya is chiming in, there are 6. What are the other 3 besides agape, eros, and philia? Could you come up with the other 3 for us and define them? I'm really curious now. So back to Rinne. They scanned 55 adults and induced feelings of love. They had them practice feeling love towards things they loved. 6 different targets they pointed it at: romantic partners, children, friends, pets, strangers, and nature. This is almost, again, like doing metta. If you haven't done metta meditation, you practice feeling love for things you already love, like your family, your relationships. You practice feeling love for things that you like. You practice feeling love for things you meh. You practice feeling love for things you don't like. And you practice feeling love for things you actively are adverse to. And then you walk back through that, and it creates a different kind of heart experience, a feeling tone. And I wonder if that is walking through these different levels of love. Okay, so our research assistant here, Ilya, has given us a little bit. Agape is, selfless love. Universal selfless love is how that is define. Okay. Eros is passionate or sexual love. Philia is friendship. Sure. Storge is familial love. Well, we have that as well mapped here. Ludus, playful love. Okay. That's interesting. And pragma, enduring love. Philautia, self-love. And mania, obsessive love. Okay. So I think if we take those and parse out the healthy structural ones from the one or two that are, or the one at least that's a bit dysregulated, these might map fairly closely onto what Renee found. But they broke it down this way: romantic, child, friend, pet, stranger, and nature. So nature's interesting. And they measured something smart: how much each type of love was felt in the body versus showing up in the brain and the mind. So here's what they found. Romantic love, full orchestra, everything firing, all four layers firing: reward, social, insula, cingulate, amygdala, hippocampus, cerebellum, everything, total package. Parental love, almost identical to romantic, except there was a part of the experiment where they did the story about the relationship, essentially, and there was also a part where they just had a regard at rest, essentially, without any cognitive context. And the parental love felt love without any priming, without any story, without any context at all. It was always ready to go. And this showed up as the thalamus stayed active in this flavor of love during this experiment more than anything else. It was thalamus and the striatum. So parental love uniquely kept the brain online. Basically, parental love is action ready all the time, even when nothing happens. Your brain is perpetually prepared to move, to act for your child. That tracks, right? All right, now friendship love, philia in Greek terms. This is the meaning areas plus the reward areas primarily. So it was a smaller neural footprint, less activation than the first two, but it showed the specific activation between the meaning areas and the reward areas. So we had less of a temporal lobe cortical involvement, less brainstem, but we had the same areas, just less. It was a quieter signal, basically. And then you look at compassionate love for strangers. And here you see value areas. You also see social, sort of pro-social behavioral areas lit up. Medial frontal regions light up, but less bond-specific areas, less bond and social tracking areas. So this is love as an abstract principle being picked up on by these people without as much of the outside social connection. So compassionate love for strangers seems to be something more in the abstract. It's the idea of stranger. And once someone becomes more familiar to you, that might change into something different that would include different social activation. Get some great questions here. Radar is asking, can neurofeedback induce a state like loving kindness meditation? Oh, we should ask some of our meditator neurofeedback experts that we work with. I think so in some people who already have some skills there. I definitely have had clients. I have a good friend client who trains and meditates a lot and frequently reports blissed out kind of states from doing a mix of alpha theta and SMR training designed for his brain a little bit. It wouldn't necessarily work exactly the same for everyone, but that theory can do a lot, mixing alpha theta and the proper SMR training for you. So, I mean, if you've done any alpha theta radar, you may have come to some of those states, some of those juicy states. I would argue those are at least the next door neighbor of a loving kindness. And if you meditated during, before, or after neurofeedback, you might be able to create that meta, that loving kindness, that feeling tone that you wish in a much more powerful way. That I see in lots of people who meditate across different styles of meditation, that they get much more out of their meditation when they're doing neurofeedback. In general, but also before sessions of meditation. Great questions. Thanks, guys. All right, so we talked about parental love. Romantic, parental, friend love, compassionate love for strangers, pet love. Do you love your pet? Of course you do. So here's my favorite finding, I think, maybe in the study. Pet love showed less activation than human love, but pet owners showed more social activity in their social regions. So people that own pets and practice loving pets showed more of the prosocial areas in the outside world, people-focused areas. So precuneus, temporal cortex, hippocampus, fusiform gyrus, they all ramped up. The fusiform gyrus, the facial recognition areas, you don't need to recognize the one pet you have. This is about bonding in general. You're learning to, you're practicing it. So your brain doesn't really have a mind model for a dog or a cat, but if you're living with one or taking care of one, it starts trying to make that model. So experience literally sculpts love. Nature is the last category that they tested. Completely different profile. Did not look the same at all. Here we see visual areas activating, the back of the head, spatial integration areas activating. Memory areas strongly activated, interestingly. Maybe there's a spatial component. Hippocampal place neurons, may have played a role in that study. If they were being exposed to novel environments, being asked to pay attention, that may have been a component too. But the outside world was being drunk in, and it wasn't about the bonding or the social components, which is very interesting. So aesthetic appreciation for things being beautiful, nature being beautiful, that deep feeling of wonder does something, but it's not the same thing as all the other flavors of love that are focused at or on or to or with. In Swedish, you would say gift med, married with somebody instead of married to somebody. I've always enjoyed that version of joining in Swedish. And this study talks about love as pointing at a target, which I don't love, because I think you love with when it's done properly. Even with a pet, your pet loves you. Even a cat, which you wouldn't think always, but cats, they love their owners. It's good research. So let me ask you, pet owners, does your brain give your dog the full emotional treatment? Science says yes. Drop a dog icon or puppy icon if that's you. All right, the clean takeaway here for all this is that different loves share reward and value circuitry, but the more personal the relationship, the more your brain recruits mind reading, empathy, and self-referential networks as well, and the larger the footprint of overall activation grows. The closer the bond, the more brains involved. So, loving that. Radar is suggesting loving kindness meditation sounds like it could help with romantic relationships and maybe even people with personality disorders. Definitely with relational stuff, it gives you the ability to be open emotionally without as much callous around your heart, but also to react less and to see better emotionally. So meta's a pretty lovely practice. 4 dogs over here. Ilya, 4 dogs? That's why you're always busy. My goodness. You should open up a secondary practice, puppy therapy, right after the neurofeedback. That's great. All right, so I promised I would talk about pain a little bit. Why does heartbreak hurt? What's up with that? Why does losing love hurt? Physically hurts, right? You feel it in your body, your gut, your chest, your legs, your energies, your mood. It's all there. Not metaphorically, body level. So Naomi Eisenberger, and before that, originally Matt, I think Lieberman was the PI in some initial work. Brilliant work. Did some experiments that showed that social exclusion activates the same circuits as physical pain. Same regions, dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, anterior insula, especially on the right. And the exact circuits, these process, I've been physically injured and I've been emotionally pained in some way. They don't want me. Looks like I've hit my thumb with a hammer in the brain. Really interesting, right? And it's dose dependent. Greater dorsal anterior cingulate activity during exclusion correlates with greater feelings of rejection. So in this study, the right ventrolateral PFC also activated during exclusion, but correlated negatively with distress. So the more right ventrolateral PFC you activate, the more dampening of that pain response. It was regulating social pain, putting the brakes on the dorsal anterior cingulate. So left-right approach versus avoid, but right activation, overactivation creates anger and pain and resistance, but right proper activation controls the sensation of avoidance or rejection or emotional pain. So here's one wild related factor. DeWall and colleagues in another study showed that if you give people acetaminophen, Tylenol, it reduces social pain. It reduces the experience, the sensation of being rejected in self-report and in neural activity. So social pain literally runs through pain hardware, and you can take a Tylenol to reduce it. Isn't that crazy or wonderful, depending on what you're experiencing? All right, so why would evolution do this? Well, one theory is because for our ancestors, living kicked out of the group was tantamount to a death sentence. So the brain co-opted pain to value the social connection, to make social disconnection feel urgent enough to fix. The pain of rejection, therefore, isn't weakness, it's survival architecture. And the opioid system, the same system targeted by morphine, regulates both physical pain and social bonding. A lot of people I work with come in because they've experienced a really intense stressor or really acute serotonergic phenomena or inflammation, and they develop something called DPDR, derealization, depersonalization. I see a shockingly large amount of it. And one of the things that people report is difficulty feeling their emotions fully. And that's the opioid system, the opiate system being blunted dramatically. And so even feelings of feeling yourself, feeling present, feeling fully in your emotions has some of that same sensitive emotional need about how the world feels in general tied to it. So if you have ADHD or autism or other fast-moving, kind of low inhibition brains, this rejection, these areas activating, they're fun. They don't just sting. They can feel like the floor dropped out, like you got hit by a truck. And what people call RSD, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, this describes intense, overwhelming emotional pain from perceived or actual rejection. And it can go further into a rejection-level OCD. Again, I'm not sure this is a true DSM diagnostic label, but I get people whose therapists have told them they have rejection OCD. And lots of people with very severe ADHD or AUDHD who have one component of their struggle is rejection sensitivity and a lot of resistance and a lot of anger around relational things. And it's a real thing. You know, it really does happen, however we categorize it. So, more questions. Let me stop for a second, answer those. Radar is asking, do I think a meditation practice could increase romantic feelings for people who have fallen out of love with their spouse or for people who have never loved intensely before? I do. I think that we can practice love, and love becomes something we get better at doing. You know, we see that in this literature. What we love is loved. You know, loving gives us the ability to love. Metta creates the ability to have more experience, have more deep love, and also to resist less and to fear less, right? Because I would argue, to get a little metaphysical, that the absence of love, or the opposite of love, is not hate, it's fear. And love has aspects of attachment that fear is a mirror image of. So probably that deserves its own video, but hopefully that was helpful. Stephanie's saying it's a punishment for not meeting your romantic procreating needs. Yes, the passing on of genes is important, but I would say that generally we have a much broader reward system around prosocial behavior that's not just about procreation. There's evidence suggesting that grandparent behavior is selected for genetically. And in animal and in humans, out-group, in-group collision where you have adopted parents coming in to take over children that are not biologically their own for the health of the overall community. Remember, when thinking about evolutionary drives and thinking about genes specifically, the evolutionary construct that promulgates more genes, the thing that we always chalk up to the reason we do stuff, it's there for survival. It's not there for your survival. It's there for the survival of the genetic line, not your genes. Your genes are not designed so your genes survive. Your genes are designed so the community you're in survives, and genes in general survive. Your genes don't care that much if you make it out alive, but they want to make sure that the system is set up to promulgate more genetic activity. Guy Soleil says he was told that. Stephanie's suggesting my mom treats her granddaughter better than she ever treated me. That can happen. Also, parents get better at being parents and caretakers get better at being caretakers. And the role and relationship is different in grandparents and parents, in some ways less vulnerable. They have permission to be the nice parent, the nice elder. So very complex, of course, with parenting. There's something biologically driving that behavior. Yeah, there very likely is. Also, I think people can have, attachment injuries throughout life, and that can have different intergenerational and cross-generational behavior. It's a very complex topic. Grandparents can feel more love for their grandchildren, their own children, maybe. Yeah. I think it's individual, and I think there may be some aspects of the reconnection of love that grandparents feel. I also think that elders develop something, especially we're talking about older grandparents, elders develop something often called gerotranscendence, where they learn and lose some of their baggage and move into a place of peace and joy and light and love a bit more easily. And so there could be some of that sometimes as people develop into later stages of life. It changes how we perceive relationships and attachment and resistance. And we definitely act differently towards our family when we're 50 and 60 and 80 than we do when we're 20 and 25. So interesting observation though, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing. Radar Ashwood is sharing lots of people get softer as they age. Yeah, it does happen. You often find that people also get more as they age, more of whatever it is they are. That tends to happen as well. So is this useful? Kinda. Here's what I see in brain maps, and the research suggests these same areas are involved. Dorsal anterior cingulate, insula, the amygdala. These all interact with emotional areas, and then you have the ADHD areas, you have the autistic spectrum areas. They're all kind of involved. So when you have any of these phenotype phenomena and these individual areas end up being a little bit dysregulated or hard to control, there's no coincidence that you feel very deeply if you have lots of fast, dysregulated brains, a little bit of anxiety, touch of OCD, touch of social loading. So I call this brain, whether or not it manifests as anxiety or a bit of autism or some ADHD, I call this brain the gifted poet phenotype. We have all of these individual areas kind of activated. So if you would like to read a book about it, I have a book coming out, I think next week. Next week, I think I'll announce a pre-order for you. But you can go to the show notes and link in the description. The book is called Gifted and Tortured, and you can go to giftedandtortured.com as well. And I will announce a direct signed initial list of, I think, 100. I'm going to buy 100 placards and sign them and send them out myself. So if you want to get in on the first author signed copies, go sign up for the Gifted and Tortured pre-release list, and I'll send you an email next week when those are available. But that's one of the reasons I'm doing this topic, is because I see many of these resources in brains all the time, and they can cramp up into a gifted and a tortured mode for many of us. And so hopefully understanding how some of these resources operate for you gives you a little more control over them, and you can then take control of them. People have been asking about meditation aspects. I think that can be very useful. There's other forms of therapy, other forms of contemplative work. There's neurofeedback. There's all kinds of things you can do to shift your mind around, including supplements and medication. Hey, El Chatterino. So is that the danger of tuning up beta or cognitive presence through the back of the to the front and diminish emotional palette. Yeah. If you activate the back of the brain too much without balancing the front, you can create somebody who is really on, but has lost their sense of emotional connection, and generally has cramped up into a fearful state, an anxious state, a resistant and avoidant state when that happens. The posterior cingulate tends to bring on the anterior and the right front very, very easily, and the back right TPJ really easily. And so if you overactivate posterior regions, you often end up, looking for sharks in the indoor pool. And that is not a very loving state. Ilya is asking, have I seen or had any hypotheses on a potential method of influencing remission from something like sociopathy with brain-based approaches? It's a great question. I don't know. I do know that the literature suggests there's neurological signatures in tissue, I believe, in sociopathy. I'm not sure how robust that literature is. I know brains are very plastic, and that my perspective is about a third of your experience is genetic and the rest is experience, meaning most of the brain can be changed. I do not know. Because I have seen people recover from really intense depersonalization or derealization, intense PTSD, intense emotional numbing, again and again and again, hundreds of people over the years. I would expect that you could work on sociopathy, a relative absence of feeling connected to others, a moral center that's only related to self. My hunch is you could find ways to crack that person open to feel more connection. But I don't know. I'm not sure if it's only about the social phenomena, the social connections, or if there is something different, fundamentally different in people whose brains have sociopathy. I'm not sure, where I come down on that. There's a few things in neuroscience and psychology where we know they exist, but we don't know what they are. And I think sociopathy is one of those things. Multiple personality or DID, dissociative identity disorder, is another one of those things. I've seen a lot of DID in patients over the years. I have friends that have experienced alters and multiples. I've had several patients or clients in a neurofeedback context as well. I still don't know how I feel about what DID actually is, but it's a phenomena that exists and people experience things. And love is like that, and pain is like that. And so to some extent, you have to acknowledge what people are experiencing. I lifted a few lines with permission from an artist, a musician named Peter Mulvey. And he has a song, he has an album called The Trouble with Poets, and there's a song, Trouble with Poets. And the first line of that is, the trouble with poets is they think too much. They tell us it hurts them a little bit more. Guess what? It does. You can see this in people's brains. You can see the intense anguish and anger, sadness, activation states, social loading. You can see this. And people describe it. So you can also see when it lifts, when someone's DPDR or relational OCD lifts, you can see the change in their brain signature. So it's not perfect. We don't understand exactly what we're looking at. It's phenomena. It's not diagnostic, but it's agency. So I encourage you to come get a brain map if you want. We have discounts for anyone watching the live stream, $250 at any Peak Brain, and you can get unlimited brain maps for a year to understand yourself. And you can do other things with us as well, but the brain mapping I find is a super useful tool. Also, I'll give Ilya a plug here down in San Diego. Peak Brain's in New York City, Southern Florida, St. Louis, Los Angeles, Orange County, and then down in San Diego, we have Brain Excel as a partner who's here on the live stream. And he'll give you a brain map as well for in the same ballpark for around $250, I think, or $300. So go see Ilya if you want, or come to a Peak Brain and join a Peak Brain. And you can look at your brain and maybe see how some of these features work for you. All right, was there anything else tonight I want to talk to you guys about? I'll hang out a little more if you have any more questions for me. I did want to end with some good news in these studies. Basically, love seems to get better with time. So, there's this myth, there's this trope of people falling out of love as they become older and older and older, and that their passion wanes. Well, guess what? Maybe not. So Acevedo and colleagues, I think Acevedo was the PI, scanned couples who've been together for an average of 21 years, married couples, 21 years, and they still reported intense romantic love. So they selected for elders who were in love. People have been married for over 20 years. And in their brains, the ventral tegmental area and the dorsal striatum, these are early passion, reward, dopamine areas, still active, still juicy, still firing after more than 2 decades. But on top of that, more activation than typical in long-term attachment regions. The globus pallidus, substantia nigra, again, dopamine, the raphe for serotonin, thalamus, insula for body awareness, the cingulates for priority. Starting to get a bit of a picture here. So this tells us long-term love is not the death of passion. It's the passion circuits themselves, maintaining commitment while the brain builds expanded bonding infrastructure around them. Love doesn't get simpler over time. It gets more sophisticated. So your brain doesn't lose interest in something it deeply values. It builds better circuitry to sustain it, to love it. All right. So what do you guys think of all this? Does this help you understanding how your brain works? The idea that the same circuits that give you the capacity for deep love might also create deep vulnerability, social pain. You know, you can see these features in QEEG. You can train these features in your behavior, in your brain with biofeedback, or your body. Heart rate variability works very well for people that are having trouble managing the activation tone. The sympathetic activation is too intense, and the parasympathetic rest and repair is hard to maintain. Heart rate variability, biofeedback works a treat for many, many people. Or the cingulates you can work on with, N-acetylcysteine, NAC, tends to relax the anterior cingulate. Good research showing in medication-resistant adolescent populations with OCD, NAC reduces intrusive thoughts significantly, 40% of them. So really, really large effects in the supplement landscape. I will say if you have a little bit of emotional sensitivity or if you have some raw emotions, there's also some supplements and herbs that can potentiate problems. You can think of a class of herbs that are serotonergic or aromatic, and they can actually trigger, I believe, DPDR and other really intense emotional states that cause us to shut down emotionally. So think of things like, and some of the supplements too, ashwagandha, St. John's wort can be in that thing if you take it too high, it's a serotonergic. Then all of the purely aromatics, lemon balm, lemongrass, holy basil, these things are psychoactive. And I've spoken to people who've potentiated significant anxiety and dissociative states after abusing compounds like this or mixing them with intense stress, pharmacological drugs, or party drugs, and creating sort of secondary effects where their whole sensitivity system then shuts down because things were just too acute, too intensely all at once. Anyways, please come back and ask questions next week. Ask questions in the chat still if you want. I'll hang out for a little bit longer. Let's see. Got some questions here. Hey Sherry, how exciting about your book? Thank you. I'm excited. You'll have to tell me what you think of it once it's available. Radar saying, I think there's a study about using neurofeedback on sociopaths. Okay. There's definitely one looking at violent offenders. There's the work with that Doug Quirk did in Canada with violent offenders. And I would argue that that is a sociopathy study, even though I don't know that he defined them as such. And that was with alpha theta. And I think it showed reversal of the 1-year reincarceration rate. So it went from 3/4 typical in that population down to 1/4 with alpha theta. I think that was a very early study in like the 70s with alpha theta in Canada. Radar saying QEEG guided neurofeedback therapy and personality disorders, 13 case studies. Okay, so case study level, interesting. So those would be one by one. You could probably identify different aspects. I bet there's more than one flavor of dysregulation there, yeah. This is the Sonia. Hi, Sonia. Hi, doctor. When you talk about genetics, generally, how many generations back would it be applicable to? In terms of the brain, great question. We know that cortisol phenomena in the brain, which are really big in regulating circadian, regulating insulin, regulating learning, mood, approach versus avoid. We know that cortisol phenomena in people are impacted by multiple generations. You know, if your grandmother experienced significant stress, her daughter would bear the signatures of it genetically and in a regulatory sense, her cortisol regulation, and so would you. We don't know how many generations back it goes, but it's not probably just two. And the idea of epigenetics, you know, when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, we were taught that, what was it, Lamarckian genetics, you couldn't acquire traits. You know, you cut the tails off mice, you breed them, they have tails. You can't pick up a trait and pass it on. But now we know about epigenetics, where experiences in the environment will change how your genetics regulate and which genes are expressed, turn off and on certain types of genes, essentially. And that seems to be what we're looking at here. The epigenetic signature of generational trauma seems to be something we know about. If that's the case, if that learning signal is architected into humans, I think chances are exceptionally good that the opposite is also architected in. That progressive learning and experiences of being safe and loved and higher cognitive regard will also potentially be inherited throughout the human race. So just like we might experience, you know, increased stress 30, 40, 50 years after a major war, my guess is we might also experience a golden age 30, 40, 50 years after we spend a lot of time and money feeding people and working on mental health and covering basic needs. I think we will at some point enter into a golden age because of the epigenetic downstream effects of solving generational trauma to some extent, or at least ameliorating it. But it doesn't just wash out in one generation. It takes both a good environment and good habits and practice to create people who are well regulated. And that is true in any environment. You can take really, really solid people, humans, creatures, whatever. This is true of all animals. Put them in environments that are supportive and they thrive. Put them in environments that are not supportive and they don't. And that is true in general. So what I would argue, but what I would take away from all of that is not that you're doomed to carry around trauma from your ancestors, or that you are burdened with creating blissful heaven on earth for your descendants, although go for it if you want. What I would argue is this really means you have responsibility over what you're feeling now, and responsibility over reducing your own suffering and your own relationship with suffering and trauma, your relationship with love, improving that. And that is where, as we started talking about at the beginning of the hour, that is where some of the tools like metta and loving kindness meditation, therapy, relational work, that's where that might come in, especially practicing that. I do believe those things will create regulations. And I believe there's been studies, there's been studies on metta and loving kindness meditation showing acute drops in cortisol by doing it. So we know there's state shifts. There's probably resource trait shifts there as well. Let's see, other questions here. Stephanie wants to get a QEEG, too sick to come to New York. I'm sorry you're sick, Stephanie. We can do a remote one if you want. They're a little more expensive, but we can do them. New York City, Los Angeles, St. Louis. And also, you know, there's more QEEG providers than just us. We're among the most affordable, but you can often find brain mapping in any big region in the world now. Radar is asking, is HeartMath the only company that does HRV biofeedback? No, there's several. There's various degrees of usability and quality. Elite HRV, which is an app on the phone, is pretty good with one of the good sensors. You can kind of pair, you know, get like a nice workout sensor, chest strap, and then get Elite HRV for the phone. There's the triple pulse sensor, the eView TPS, HeartMath as well. But there's also the usability of these things. You know, whenever you're working with sensors and software, this stuff's often cutting edge from 20 years ago. And so getting the software and systems out of your way is really important. And I think HeartMath does that the best, largely. Although I think that Divergence Neuro, maybe Mendy are bringing in HRV soon as well. So keep your eyes open. Stephanie's asking, what about people who love their abusers? How is that explained in terms of purpose? It's not. That is a transference. That is a flip where you the trauma creates a distorted relationship, and it distorts many, many things. It's a very complicated topic, but it's not really about love itself. It's about trauma. And the trauma becomes a signal, and fawning, loving your abuser, fawning or placating is a survival strategy to some extent. And if you practice that survival strategy, if you fake it, you'll make it eventually. So there is an attachment to the abuser, to the safety of the environment, even when it's not safe. It's a very, very complicated thing we do. I think it probably reflects the idea that, humans have not had especially easy lives over the past several million years. And, we have to still survive. And that's one of the accommodations or adaptations we make that is not perfectly an adaptive strategy. It's not perfectly healthy, but it is one that keeps us surviving. So that's my guess on that. I'm not an attachment psychology specialist, but that's my off-the-cuff take. I hope it's useful. This is the Sonia's asking, would neurofeedback be helpful for having an extreme sensitivity to social rejection and quick anger? Yes, it would. Extreme rejection sensitivity or social anxiety, extreme anger, extreme frustration, extreme splitting, where, well, okay, screw you. If you can't do this, then I don't want anything, kind of that flipping from one mode to the other. Those are all things you can work on very successfully with neurofeedback. Yeah, frontal asymmetry work, right tempoparietal junction work, impulsivity work, especially over the right precentral areas. If you have, that can be coming from fear and trauma. Now it's the posterior cingulate, as well as potentially deeper areas around the amygdalae. But yes, but it's complex. And so work with somebody who knows how to move gently through trying things, and also look at your brain first so you know what is likely to work and you're on the right path to start. So great question though. So thanks guys. You hung out for an hour. Amazing. Even though I showed up 5 minutes late after fighting with the YouTube gods. So do me a favor, like and subscribe this video. Go find another one, like and subscribe it. Share it with a friend. YouTube loves when you share YouTube videos off the platform. They really do. But I'm back. I'll be back next week. Next week I should be announcing the ability to purchase the book in a pre-release, and then I'm going to be doing some proofreading that week on a physical copy. And as soon as the physical copy is proofed, I will order all of the author copies that I'm going to give out as my first batch. I will award a book. I'll give away a book a week for a month to whoever is actually live or comments on the live stream in the week after each one of the live streams starting next week. And then I'll have a limited number of signed author copies out for the first people that want to jump in and purchase one. And maybe if you can, go to Amazon and leave reviews after that, because that is what creates book sales as well, from what I'm told. All right, guys. So have a lovely evening or morning if you're watching this later. Take care of those brains. Be well, and I'll talk to you soon.